They stood in front of that chair like they were guarding something that was never theirs to protect. "You're not mentioned in the will," Calvin said flatly, arms folded across his chest like a man who'd already decided how the day would end. Kenny added, "This is for immediate family only." I looked at my sons, two grown men in tailored suits, and for just a moment, I couldn't draw a breath. Immediate family. I was the one who brought them into this world. I was the one who stayed. The room was cold despite the heavy drapes and the polished mahogany table that caught the light like it was proud of itself. I stood at the entrance holding my navy folder against my chest, the same way I used to hold my Bible on Sunday mornings. Not for show. For steadiness. Inside that folder was everything I needed. Not copies. Originals. But right then, nobody in that room cared what I was holding. Not the attorney. Not the paralegal. Not the handful of distant relatives who barely lifted their eyes when I walked in. "I received a letter," I said quietly. "From Hargrove and Associates. It had this address and this date." Calvin made a sound in the back of his throat, something between a scoff and a laugh. "They must have made an error. We're handling the estate now. Aunt Celestine appointed us last fall. She didn't have children. I'm her sister." Kenny gave me that half smile I remembered from when he was a teenager trying to explain something he thought was beyond me. "Mom, look. You're not in this version. We can explain everything after. But please right now, just don't make a scene." I looked down at the floor. Old carpet, burgundy with a pattern worn thin in the center, a dark stain near the sideboard. Coffee, maybe. Or something older. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I stepped forward. "I'm not here to make a scene," I said carefully. "I'm here because Celestine wanted me here." "You're not on the list," said the young woman behind the desk. Her nameplate read Ms. Reeves. She looked uncomfortable in the way young people do when they're caught between what they've been told and what they can plainly see. I didn't blame her one bit. "She would have wanted me here," I said again. "Not to my sons this time. To the room itself." I took another step forward, reached into my folder, and drew out a single document. I walked it over to Ms. Reeves and placed it in her hands. "Please give this to Mr. Tatum," I said. "I believe it takes precedence over any amendments made last fall." Ms. Reeves blinked, nodded, and carried the paper toward the door at the far end of the room. Calvin started to say something, but Kenny caught his arm. "Just wait," Kenny muttered under his breath. I sat down in the chair they had been blocking. Neither of them moved to stop me. The folder rested in my lap, but I no longer held it the way I had at the door. I held it like what it was. Proof. I hadn't planned to speak first. I had imagined this day many times over the past few weeks, the ceremony of it, the formal tone, a proper reading of a proper will. A solemn occasion, the way Celestine would have wanted. Not this. Not this small, ugly gatekeeping at the door of a room I had every right to enter. I looked across the table at a cousin I hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. He gave me a quiet nod. I returned it. The door at the end of the room opened. Mr. Tatum stepped in. Tall, silver-bearded, always a faint smell of old paper and cedar about him, like a library that had never been updated and didn't need to be. He held the document I'd sent in, turning through the pages with deliberate slowness. "Mrs. Gladys," he said, "may I have a word with you privately?" Calvin stiffened. We were told this was a closed session. Mr. Tatum didn't even look at him. "This concerns joint filings from 2008. If you'll follow me, please." I rose and followed him down the hall. My legs were steady. My chest was not, but nobody needed to know that. His office smelled like cedar and something older. No chairs, just a high counter. He laid the paper flat between us. "This is not what I expected," he said. "No," I agreed. "You and Celestine executed a mutual will in 2008. Witnessed, notarized, filed with the county. It predates the revision your sons submitted by several years." He paused. She insisted on it. I know, I said. She didn't trust anyone but me. He looked up over his glasses. Legally, it overrides the later amendments unless it was revoked in your presence. He waited. Was it? No. He nodded once. Then he closed the folder. You are the sole beneficiary. The entire estate. The house, the land, the accounts. All of it. A pause settled between us like something that had been waiting a long time to land. The boys don't know? I asked. They suspect something. But no. They don't know the extent of it. He exhaled slowly. Would you like me to inform them? No, I said. Let them hear it at the reading. With everyone else in the room. He studied me for a moment. Then he closed the file. You'll stay for the reading? Yes, I said. Now that I've been allowed to sit. When I returned to the room, neither Calvin nor Kenny looked at me directly. But I saw their postures shift. Something had moved in that office and they could feel it the way you feel weather change before the sky shows it. For once, I was not the one waiting to be led somewhere. I was already exactly where I was supposed to be. The house was quiet when I got home that evening, but not the kind of quiet that wraps around you soft and easy. This was the kind of quiet that holds its breath. I hung my coat on the hook by the door, slipped off my good shoes, and went straight to the kitchen. The light over the sink had been flickering for months. I kept meaning to call someone about it. I never did. Nobody else was coming through that kitchen but me. I put water on for tea even though my stomach was wound too tight for anything. Habit is a powerful thing. It keeps your hands busy when your mind won't settle. There was a time when that kitchen was never quiet. Calvin and Kenny arguing over the last of the cereal before school. Celestine leaning in the doorway, laughing at something only she found funny. James, my husband, clinking his coffee mug against mine every single morning before work, just to make me smile. Just because he knew it would. That was another life. James died 22 years ago, just after the new year. Heart failure. He was gone before I could even get the ambulance to our street. I remember sitting on the front porch in my housecoat, snow melting into my slippers, the phone dangling from my hand like something I'd forgotten how to use. Calvin was 23. Kenny had just turned 20. They were devastated for about a week. Then things turned practical. Who gets the car? Who handles the insurance? Who pays the mortgage? They stepped into adulthood the way some boys do, fast and loud and without looking back to see if anyone was keeping up. At first I was proud of them. Calvin got into real estate, started making real money within 2 years. He had the kind of charm that made people hand things over before they'd finished thinking it through. Kenny stayed local, got into auto mechanics, opened a shop with a friend from the neighborhood, said he liked working with his hands. I helped them both. I always helped. When Calvin's first investment deal collapsed and he needed to bridge the gap, I wrote him a check. When Kenny's partner disappeared with their startup money, I dipped into my pension. No questions asked. Just love. That's what mothers do. And when Celestine started getting sick, when her letters stopped being witty and started repeating themselves, when she couldn't hold on to a thought from one room to the next, I was the one who found her a good doctor. I drove her to every appointment. She hated the idea of a facility, so I turned my guest room into her own little space, the way she liked it. She's not our responsibility, Kenny said one afternoon when I asked him to pick up her prescriptions on his way over. You're her sister. I didn't answer him. There was nothing that needed saying. But Celestine had always known the truth of people. She'd spent a lifetime reading them. She never married, never had children. Said she had more than enough family to manage. Thank you very much. She was sharp and witty and wore good perfume even on the days she never left the house. One evening, about a year after she'd moved into my guest room, she asked if we could write our wills together. People change their minds real fast when money gets on the table, she said. Let's not give them the chance to change ours. We met with a lawyer, Mr. Tatum's predecessor, and had it done properly. 2 signatures, 2 witnesses, each of us naming the other the sole beneficiary. I remember thinking it felt like more ceremony than necessity, but I went along because Celestine asked me to, and because I loved her, and because some things are worth doing right even when you hope you'll never need them. Years passed. Celestine's mind dimmed slowly, the way good light fades at the end of a long day. But she still smiled whenever I read poetry to her. Still called me baby sister even when she couldn't remember what month it was. She died on a Thursday morning, quiet and peaceful, in the room I'd made for her. I sat with her for 2 hours before I called anyone. Not because I was in denial. Because some people deserve a soft goodbye. A moment of stillness before the world comes rushing in. The funeral was small. Family, a few neighbors, some old friends from her working years. Calvin gave a speech that sounded like he'd written it the night before and rehearsed it in the car. Kenny stood with his hands in his pockets, stiff and distant. Neither of them had visited her more than twice in the last year. But after the service, things changed quickly. Calvin started calling more often. Kenny started dropping by without warning. They offered to help with the estate. "You shouldn't be dealing with all of this alone, Mom." I let them. I watched. I waited. When the letter from Hargrove and Associates came in the mail, I didn't say a word to either of them. It was addressed to me. Full name, correct address. No mistake. Then last week I overheard Calvin on his phone while he thought I was out back in the garden. "She doesn't need to be there," he was saying. "We've got the final draft. It's all lined up." I went upstairs, opened the fireproof box, and took out the Navy folder. Everything they thought was lined up had been settled years before they ever knew to look. Still, some part of me hoped I was wrong. Hoped they were just being careless the way busy people sometimes are, not calculating, not cruel. But today proved what I already knew in my bones. Today, they blocked my chair. Celestine and I were born 11 months apart. Practically twins, people used to say. I was the quiet one. Always reading, always watching, always taking careful note of the world. She was the spark. The one with the bright headbands in her hair and opinions that were too large for whatever room she walked into. We shared a bedroom until we were 16. She taught me how to fake a headache to get out of church and how to keep a straight face when you'd done something you weren't supposed to. I taught her how to budget, how to write a proper thank you note, how to hold a secret without cracking under pressure. Our parents died young. Car accident on the interstate, 1 week before my 19th birthday. Celestine had just turned 18. We were alone in the house we grew up in, 2 girls with nothing but each other and the sense God gave us. We sold the place within a year and moved into a rental. Found work, paid bills, figured things out the way you do when there's no other choice. I met James at the public library of all places. He was fixing the heating unit in the reading room. Said my voice sounded like something worth listening to when I read aloud to the children's group. I told him he was trying too hard. He said trying was half the battle. I married him a year later. Celestine never married, but she lived full. She traveled when she could, the Caribbean, West Africa, Japan once, taught English abroad, worked at an art gallery, spent several years in radio. Her stories never ended the way you thought they would. Every time she came home, for Christmas or for my birthday or just because she felt like it, she brought something strange and wonderful. A stone carved into the shape of a fish. An apron embroidered with sunflowers. A jar of hot pepper jelly from a market in New Orleans. The boys adored her when they were small. "Aunt Celestine," they'd holler, running to the door before she'd even rung the bell. She'd scoop them up, let them stay up past bedtime, feed them sweet potato pie before dinner. James would catch my eye across the room and shake his head, smiling. "She's not here to raise them," he'd say. "She's here to remind them that life is supposed to be good." That changed as they got older. Once Calvin left for college, he stopped making time for her visits. Kenny followed, though with a little less sharpness about it. They grew tired of her energy. Said she was too much. I watched it happen the way you watch a slow leak, steady and quiet until one day you look down and realize the whole floor is wet. When she moved in after her diagnosis, mild cognitive decline sliding into early Alzheimer's, neither of them offered so much as an afternoon. Too busy, they'd say. Celestine knew, even through the fog of it. She knew. One afternoon while I was brushing her hair, she said softly, "They'll come when I'm gone. Watch them circle like they're waiting on something. Only showing up when there's something to take." It wasn't bitterness in her voice. Just recognition. The way you say it might rain before you even look at the sky. Her decline was gradual but certain. First she forgot how to work the microwave. Then she started misplacing things, her keys, her reading glasses, the small Bible she kept on her nightstand. Then one afternoon she introduced me to the mail carrier as her neighbor from down the street. I never corrected her. What would have been the point? But there were moments. Clear, bright moments that came without warning, like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. She'd look at me and her eyes would sharpen and she'd say, "Gladys, if I ever forget who I am, just remind me who you are." I promised her I would. And I did, every single time she needed me to. I took care of her until the very end. It wasn't always easy. There were nights she wandered out the back door, and I had to follow her down the sidewalk in bare feet, calling her name softly so as not to frighten her. There were mornings I found her slippers in the refrigerator and her orange juice on the windowsill. But I never lost my patience. Not once. Because love isn't only about the beautiful moments. Love is about holding steady when the person you love is drifting somewhere you can't follow. Near the end, she stopped speaking in full sentences. Just small sounds, a hum, a nod, the occasional word that floated up from somewhere deep. But whenever I sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand, she always turned toward me. The day before she passed, she squeezed my hand twice. Once for hello. Once for goodbye. I didn't cry when she died. Not right away. Grief moves on its own schedule and doesn't ask permission. But now, weeks later, I feel her absence in the strangest places. The extra teacup I keep forgetting to put away. The wind chimes on the back porch that barely move anymore. The particular silence of a Sunday morning when nobody is calling my name from down the hall. And today in that room, when Calvin stood in front of me like a man collecting a debt and said, "You're not mentioned here," I wanted to laugh. Not because anything about it was funny, but because if Celestine had been standing in that room, whole and sharp and present, she would have looked those boys dead in the eye and said, "Sugar, you are about to learn what it means to underestimate a woman who has already survived everything but her own silence." That's why I brought the folder. Not to cause trouble. Not to win something. But because I promised my sister I would show up. And I have never broken a promise to her yet. The morning after the will reading, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold and an envelope still sealed in front of me. It held a certified copy of the original will, the one Celestine and I signed together, notarized, witnessed, and stored in my fireproof box for years without either of us ever needing to open it again. I hadn't looked at it since the day we filed it. I didn't need to. I knew every word by heart. A dull ache had settled in behind my eyes. Not quite a headache. More like the particular weight you carry when you know something has shifted and there's no shifting it back. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was noticing. Noticing that Calvin hadn't called. Not a text. Not a word. Kenny either. The silence between us wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. They needed time to regroup, to find an angle, to figure out how to reframe what had happened in that office. Or maybe they were simply waiting for me to feel so ashamed of myself that I'd call first and give them an opening. That had happened before. When James passed, I made the mistake of trusting Calvin with the estate paperwork. He was the older one, the more organized one, or so I believed. Within 2 weeks he had talked me into signing over the deed to our family home. Just until probate clears, Mom. It's simpler for the taxes. I signed without understanding what I was handing over. 2 years later I had to sit across from my own son and beg him not to refinance the house in his name. He told me I was being dramatic. That was the first time I felt it. The tilt. The slow, quiet shift from mother to obstacle. Kenny was more subtle about it. He never asked for control. He asked for sympathy, and I gave it freely because that's what I knew how to do. When he needed money for a new engine, it was just a short loan. When his third girlfriend left and he couldn't get off the couch, I was the one who came over, scrubbed his kitchen, cleaned out his refrigerator, and sat with him while he sorted himself out. He never yelled at me. He just forgot, consistently and completely, to say thank you. And over the years, without ever making a decision about it, I stopped offering. Not out of bitterness. Out of self-preservation. There's a difference, though it took me a long time to learn it. The envelope on the table caught the morning light. I reached out, opened the flap, and slid the papers onto the table. My handwriting was right there beside Celestine's on the last page. Firm and clean. No trembling in the pen. We had been so certain, so united. This document is irrevocable unless jointly dissolved with written consent of both parties, it read. She never revoked it. I never wanted to. Even as her mind unraveled in those final months, she still trusted me to remember for the both of us. Now that trust was written in legal ink on county record. I sat there a long while, reading those pages like they were a letter from her. In a way, they were. After a while, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in close to 10 years. Hargrove and Associates. This is Dana speaking. Hello, sweetheart. May I speak with Mr. Tatum, please? It's Gladys. One moment, Mrs. Gladys. He picked up on the third ring. Gladys. I was just about to call you. Is that right? I said, letting the edge in my voice show just enough. Yes. I've reviewed everything thoroughly. Your claim is not only legitimate, it takes full precedence. You are the sole legal heir. The other will, frankly, should never have been processed without an examination of the prior agreement. Whoever handled that filing did sloppy work. So it's done. It's done, he confirmed. I've already filed notice with the registrar. The estate is being transferred into your name. The house, the land, the investment account, everything listed in the 2008 will. You should have formal confirmation by the end of next week. I thanked him and set the phone down. Then I sat for a long while looking out the window at the dogwood tree Celestine planted in the backyard in 1995. It was blooming again, pale pink blossoms reaching out toward the morning like they had somewhere important to be. I'd always meant to ask her why she chose that particular tree. She'd said once it reminded her of something delicate that refused to quit. That day, watching those blossoms move in the early breeze, I understood exactly what she meant. The house felt different in the days that followed. Not the silence of something missing, but the silence of something waiting. And I knew they would come. Not right away, but soon. They would arrive with explanations dressed up as apologies, justifications wearing the costume of concern. They would bring flowers they didn't choose themselves and smiles that stopped just short of their eyes. They would say things like, there was a misunderstanding, and that's not what we intended, and we just want to make sure you're okay. And I would nod, because I have learned over a long life that nodding can say more than any words I might offer. That was when I made my decision. Not about revenge. I have never been interested in revenge. But about clarity. This was not about making my sons suffer. It was about making absolutely certain they never again mistook my silence for weakness or my patience for permission. I reached for my notepad and wrote down 3 names. A plan was beginning to take shape. One that would require patience and precision, and a woman fully awake, fully present, and fully unwilling to be overlooked. Not anymore. I didn't tell anyone I was going to see Mr. Tatum. Let them picture me sitting in my kitchen staring at the wall. Let them imagine me curled up somewhere soft, whispering their names through tears, waiting for the phone to ring. Let them hold on to that version of me because it was the version they'd always found most comfortable. The quiet woman who gave and forgave and stepped back from the table without ever asking for her seat. But I walked into that office with a folder in my handbag and a list of names on my notepad and one very clear purpose. Mr. Tatum looked up from his desk when I came in, surprised. "Gladys," he said, starting to rise. "You didn't need an appointment, but I'm glad you came." "I want to formalize the transfer," I said, sitting down before he could finish standing. "All of it. The titles, the bank accounts, the investment holdings. Everything updated into my name. And I want protections in place." He blinked. "Protections. Legal locks. I don't want either of my sons accessing a single cent of this estate. Not through a proxy, not through power of attorney, not through a sympathetic phone call to someone who doesn't know the full story." I paused. "And especially not through charm." He cleared his throat, reached for his pen. "We can draft a restriction clause. You're well within your rights. The property titles can be updated to reflect sole ownership. That process takes a few weeks, but we can move on the liquid accounts immediately. I'd like to do that today if possible. There's too much cash sitting unprotected." "Understood." He opened a folder, pulled up the necessary forms. As he worked, I looked around his office. Paper and lemon oil and good solid furniture that had been there for decades. Not flashy, just dependable. It reminded me of James's workbench, full of tools that did exactly what they were supposed to do. "I also want to establish a trust," I said. He looked up. "A living trust. For someone who has actually treated me like a person." "Do you have a beneficiary in mind?" "I do. Her name is Nadia. Nadia Whitfield. She's my cousin's granddaughter. 26 years old. Works the evening shift at the city library. Comes to see me every 2 weeks without fail. Never once asked me for anything. He studied me with something close to warmth." "And you want to make her a successor to a portion of Celestine's estate?" "Not all of it. But enough. Enough to give her options she doesn't have right now. Enough to let her breathe without counting every dollar." He smiled gently. "That's very generous." "No," I said. "It's appropriate. There's a difference." We worked quietly for the better part of an hour. I signed where I needed to sign, read every clause, asked questions when something wasn't clear. Mr. Tatum never once rushed me, never talked over me, never explained something twice in a simpler way as though I hadn't understood it the first time. That kind of respect is rarer than it should be. When everything was in motion, I leaned back in my chair. "One more thing," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "I want a provision in my own will. If either of my sons contests any part of these arrangements after I am gone, they are to receive nothing. Not a dollar, not a deed, not a piece of furniture." "A no contest clause," he said. "Yes." He wrote it down without another word. Some people might call that harsh. People who have never looked into the eyes of their own child and seen pure calculation looking back might find it hard to understand. But I understood it completely. And I was done pretending otherwise. I left Mr. Tatum's office with a small stack of paperwork and a feeling I hadn't carried in years. Not joy exactly. Something quieter than joy. The stillness that comes after a long storm when the air is finally clear even though the ground is still wet. I took the long way home. Drove slowly past the elementary school where I taught 3rd grade for nearly 30 years. The playground was empty, the swings moving just slightly in the afternoon breeze. I used to walk that way with Calvin on one side and Kenny on the other, their winter coats half zipped, their cheeks red from the cold, both of them arguing over who would get to ring the doorbell when we got home. Now they wouldn't hold a door open for me. At home the answering machine was blinking. 2 messages. I pressed play. First was Kenny. "Hey Mom. Just calling to check in. Hope you're doing all right. Randall and I were talking and we think we should probably all sit down together. Clear the air. Get on the same page." Then Calvin. "Mother. I think there may have been some confusion surrounding the will documents. It's possible there was a clerical issue on someone's part. We're looking into it, but we'd appreciate it if you could forward any paperwork you brought to the meeting. For transparency. Transparency. I almost laughed out loud. That is the word people use when they want to see through you rather than with you. I deleted both messages. Then I sat down and wrote 2 letters. One to Calvin. One to Kenny. Short, measured, clear as creek water. I received your message. I am not available to discuss the estate at this time. All matters are being handled through my attorney. Please direct any further questions to his office. Mother. No apology. No softening. No door left open for negotiation. I wasn't angry when I wrote those letters. I was awake. And a woman who wakes up after years of making herself smaller, of filing down her own edges to fit the space others carved out for her, does not go back to sleep. That is not how waking up works. The doorbell rang at 9 in the morning. I was still in my robe, coffee warming my hands. Through the front window I saw a dark sedan parked crooked at the curb. Calvin's. He hadn't parked in front of my house in years. Always too busy, always somewhere across town with something more important pulling at him. I didn't answer right away. Let him wait. The second ring came faster, sharper. He was always that way when the world didn't move at his pace. When I opened the door, he gave me the smile I recognized from every holiday gathering after James died. The one that started at his mouth and stopped before it reached his eyes. "Hi, Mom," he said, as though we hadn't stood across a lawyer's desk from each other 2 days prior. I was in the area. I raised an eyebrow. At 9 in the morning. On a Saturday. He laughed like I was making a joke. "May I come in?" I stepped aside. Not because I wanted to. Because I wanted to see how far he'd go. He walked in the way he always had, like he still remembered where everything was, which he did. Looked around the room slowly, sensing something different without being able to name what it was. I hadn't moved the furniture. I'd moved myself. I didn't offer coffee. He sat on the edge of the armchair, fingers laced together, jacket too formal for a casual drop-by visit on a Saturday morning. A man dressed for a negotiation, he was pretending was a conversation. "I wanted to talk," he began. "There seems to have been some miscommunication around Aunt Celestine's documents. Trevor and I were blindsided." "Were you?" I asked softly. He paused. "Well, yes. Nobody told us there was a prior will. One that overrides the newer one." "Because you didn't ask." He blinked. "You assumed," I continued. "You assumed she left everything to you. That I would sit quietly and nod along the way I always have. That I wouldn't know what was in my own hands." "I wouldn't put it that way." "No," I said. "You wouldn't. But I would. And I just did." The pause that followed was thick with everything neither of us was saying. Then he leaned forward slightly, voice shifting into that register I remembered from when he used to sell me on ideas I hadn't asked for. "Mom, we're family. We should be working together here. We can find a solution that works for everyone. You're very good at what you do, Calvin. Always have been. I'm not trying to sell you anything." "You sold me once before," I said quietly, "when you told me I needed to sign over the house for tax purposes." His mouth closed. He looked down at his hands. There it was. "I'm not angry," I said. "That's not what this is. I've made my arrangements. Everything is being handled through my attorney. And if you attempt to challenge any part of it, you will be disinherited from anything that remains in my name." He looked up. "You're really going to cut us out completely?" "I'm going to stop rewarding neglect," I said. "There's a difference." He sat back in the chair. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, he had absolutely nothing to say. Kenny showed up 2 days later. No suit, no sedan. Just his usual jeans and a work jacket with grease at the cuffs that he'd made only a partial effort to clean. He didn't knock right away. Just stood on the porch shifting his weight from one foot to the other like a boy waiting to be called in for supper. I watched him through the curtain for a full minute before I opened the door. He smiled the way he used to when he was young and had done something wrong and didn't know how to begin saying so. "Hey, Ma." It had been years since he'd called me that. "You here for a visit or you need something fixed?" I asked. He scratched the back of his neck. "Maybe a little of both." I stepped aside. He came in, took off his boots without being asked, which his brother had not done. Sat down at the kitchen table the way he used to when he was between jobs or between girlfriends and needed somewhere steady to land. I made tea. Old habit. We sat in silence while it steeped. "I didn't know about the old will," he said finally. "Calvin handled everything with the lawyers. I just went along with what he told me." I stirred my tea. "You always did." "I know." He looked at his hands. "I guess I shouldn't have." He seemed older than I remembered, tired around the eyes. But I knew better than to mistake tiredness for change. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, slid it across the table toward me. "I don't want anything from you, Ma. That's not why I'm here. This is a list of everything I borrowed from you over the years. Every amount. I know I can't pay it back all at once, but I want to. I intend to." That stopped me. Not because of the gesture itself. I have seen enough gestures in my life to know they can be purchased cheaply. What stopped me was the math. I picked up the paper and read through it. Every number was right. Down to the $50 I'd pressed into his hand for a tow truck 6 years ago on a rainy Tuesday. "You kept track," I said. "Always meant to make it right. Just didn't know how to say it. And now you do." Watching Calvin scramble over something that was never his made me think. He was quiet for a moment. I was angry at the reading. At you, at Aunt Celestine, at the whole situation. But I wasn't surprised. "Why not?" "Because you're not a foolish woman, Ma. You never were. I think we just counted on you acting like you were." I looked down at the steam rising from my cup. He wasn't wrong. It had never been about whether I knew. It had always been about whether I would speak. "I want to earn back your trust," Kenny said quietly. "Then don't fight the will," I said. "Don't hire lawyers. Don't let Calvin talk you into anything that isn't yours to claim. Just leave it alone and let it be what it is." He nodded slowly. "I can do that." I didn't smile. I didn't reach across the table. I just looked at him steadily and said, "Good." And for once, that was enough for both of us. I wasn't surprised when the letter from Calvin's attorney arrived. I was only surprised it took him as long as it did. It came in a heavy envelope with a downtown return address I recognized. The kind of firm that charges by the syllable and wraps aggression in the language of courtesy. The letter used words like unfortunate discrepancy and pending clarification and mutually beneficial resolution. It requested a brief consultation to align understanding. It didn't mention money directly. It didn't need to. It ended with a line about reserving the right to pursue all available legal remedies should discussion fail to produce results. I read it once. Then again. Then set it down on the table. Something old stirred in my chest. Not fear exactly. More like memory. A memory of sitting in a bank office with James when we were young, signing our first mortgage papers while a loan officer talked over my head like I was decoration. I hadn't spoken up then. I just smiled and nodded and signed where they pointed. I made tea, sat at the table, and called Mr. Tatum. "I was expecting your call," he said. "I received a copy this morning. Will it hold anything up? It may cause a brief delay, but only briefly. This is posturing, Gladys. The will is unshakable. What they're hoping is that you'll find the process exhausting enough to offer a compromise. They don't know me as well as they think they do." "Clearly not," he said. I could hear the quiet smile in his voice. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake thinking not about documents or account numbers, but about Calvin at 7 years old, standing at the edge of the public pool, too afraid to jump. How I had stood in the water with my arms wide open, telling him I would catch him. And I did. Every single time he worked up the nerve to leap. There is no word I know for the particular ache of realizing that someone you once caught without hesitation would now prefer to see you sink. The next morning I wrote Calvin a letter. Not for the lawyers. Not for any courtroom. For him. Calvin. I received your attorney's letter. You've made your position clear, so I will make mine equally clear. I will not rescind the will. I will not negotiate. I will not sit across from men who see me only as an inconvenience standing between them and something they believe they are owed. You have already taken enough from me. I am simply choosing, for the first time, not to give you more. Mother. I folded it, sealed it, wrote his address in my own hand. Drove to the post office and dropped it in the slot myself. I didn't feel victorious when I walked back to my car. I felt like someone who had finally set down a box she had been carrying for far too long and in far too many directions. When I got home, the answering machine was blinking. Nadia's voice filled the kitchen like good light. Hi, Aunt Gladys. I hope this week hasn't been too heavy on you. I made lemon pound cake, the kind with the glaze you like. I'll bring it by tomorrow if that's all right. I miss you. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and smiled. For the first time in days, I smiled without having to think about it first. Nadia arrived the next afternoon with the cake wrapped in a dish towel and that soft knock she always used, gentle and patient, like she wanted to give me the option of not answering even though she knew I always would. I opened the door before she could knock twice. She smiled when she saw me. Still quick on your feet. Still sweeter than the situation calls for, I said, stepping back to let her in. She set the cake on the counter carefully, unwrapped it with both hands. Inside it was glazed just right, golden, fragrant, arranged on a plate she'd brought from home. Celestine would have appreciated that. The care of it. The intention. We sat at the table the way we always did. I poured tea from the good pot, the one with the hairline crack under the handle that I'd never gotten around to replacing because it still poured perfectly fine. Nadia never mentioned the crack. She just held her cup with both hands and listened. Have they called again? She asked after a while, without naming who she meant. Calvin sent a lawyer. Kenny came by twice. I told them both what needed to be said. She nodded, eyes lowered, picking gently at the edge of the dish towel. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. That caught me somewhere I wasn't prepared for. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had said those words to me. Not to me. Not on my behalf. I looked at her. 26 years old. Hair always half pinned, half free. Freckles across her nose that she'd had since she was a little girl. A quality of attention in her that made you feel genuinely heard. You remind me of her sometimes, I said. Not in how you look. In how you carry yourself. Nadia's eyes softened. She was good to me even when she forgot my name. She still held my hand like she knew exactly who I was. She did know you. Her heart remembered even when her mind couldn't hold on. We sat a while longer. Tea, cake, the kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. Then I told her. Not everything at once, but enough. That the estate was settled, that the legal matters were in order, that a trust was being prepared with her name on it. Modest but stable. Enough to give her room to breathe. She went very still. You don't have to do that, she said. I know. Why me? Because you come, I said simply. Because you stay. Because in all the years I've known you, you have never once arrived empty-handed or left me feeling emptier than before you got here. Her eyes filled. I don't deserve that kind of trust. Nobody deserves it, I said gently. That's the whole point. It isn't earned. It's given. To the people who would never think to ask for it. She helped with the dishes before she left even though I told her not to. And at the door she turned back and looked at me with that steady gaze of hers. If anyone ever tries to make you feel small again, she said, you call me. I'll remind you who you are. I didn't cry until the door closed behind her. Not from sadness. From something else entirely. From the rare and solid feeling of being believed in by someone who had nothing to gain from it. The call came late that night. I had already turned off the lights and changed into my nightgown, folding the day away like something that had served its purpose. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. At a certain age you answer the phone because you never know what can't wait until morning. Ma. Kenny's voice, low and strained. Are you all right? A long pause. Calvin filed a motion. He's contesting the will. Says Aunt Celestine wasn't competent when she signed it. Says she was pressured. I closed my eyes. Not from shock. From the deep weariness of watching someone you raised choose to be exactly who you feared they'd become. She wasn't pressured, I said. I know that. Then let him fight a ghost. Kenny was quiet for a moment. He's threatening to name me in the suit if I don't stand with him. Says if I side with you, I'm betraying the family. I sat up in bed. He said that. Yes, ma'am. Betraying the family. As though Calvin himself hadn't redrawn every line of this family to suit his own convenience. As though loyalty were a coat he could put on and take off depending on the weather. You do what you need to do to protect yourself, I said. But don't protect him at the cost of your own conscience. I'm not as strong as you think I am, Ma. You don't have to be strong. You just have to be clear about what's right. He didn't answer right away. You're not a boy anymore, Kenny. You don't need your brother's permission to be decent. I wish Daddy was here, he said. So did I. James had a way of settling things without raising his voice, without theatrics, without making anyone feel cornered. He believed in fairness and he had no patience for people who mistook cleverness for righteousness. Your father would have told you to stop asking what Calvin wants, I said, and start asking what you can live with. We talked a little longer. Quiet, careful words between two people trying to find the edges of a mess someone else had made. After we hung up, I lay awake for a long while staring at the ceiling. Calvin wanted a fight. He could have one. But not the kind with shouting or accusations or doors slammed hard enough to shake the frame. The kind with silence. With documents. With the unshakable dignity of a woman who has stopped flinching. I made tea, sat by the window in the dark. The neighborhood was soft and still. Wind moving through the trees. Stars between the clouds. Calvin had no idea what it truly meant to be on the wrong side of a patient woman. He was about to find out. The courtroom was smaller than I remembered from the one time I'd served on a jury decades ago. Back then it had felt enormous, formal, built to remind you of your smallness. Today it felt like exactly what it was. A room. 4 walls and a ceiling and people trying to sort out the truth. Mr. Tatum sat beside me with everything organized into labeled folders. The 2008 will. The notarized statements. Pages from Celestine's journals, her handwriting firm and clear, her thoughts precise and reasoned. A photograph of the two of us standing outside the county office the day we filed the will, both of us laughing at something the photographer had said. She didn't look like a woman who didn't know her own mind. She looked like herself. Calvin sat at the opposite table. His attorney had withdrawn the morning of the hearing. I didn't ask why. I had a feeling the man had reviewed the full file and decided his reputation wasn't worth the effort. The judge was a woman. Sharp-eyed, unhurried, with the particular patience of someone who has heard every variation of every story and is waiting only for the facts. She reviewed the file. Asked Mr. Tatum 2 questions. Then turned to Calvin. You've submitted a motion contesting the validity of a 2008 will on grounds of mental incompetence. Is that correct? Calvin stood. Yes, Your Honor. I believe my aunt was not in full capacity when the document was signed. Mr. Tatum slid a folder across to the clerk without drama. In that folder, Your Honor, you will find documentation confirming the decedent's full mental capacity at the time of signing. This includes her personal journals from that period, a statement from her physician, and verification from a handwriting analyst confirming the consistency of her signature across the years in question. The judge read through it slowly. Then she looked at Calvin over the top of the folder. Do you have documentation to the contrary? Calvin shifted his weight. Not documentation exactly, Your Honor, but I believe the circumstances. This court does not operate on belief without evidence, she said, her voice even and final. I've reviewed this case thoroughly. There is no merit to this contest. The will stands exactly as written and filed. Motion dismissed. She brought the gavel down once. Clean and certain. Mr. Tatum leaned toward me. It's done. I nodded. I had known it would be. But there is still something in you that doesn't fully exhale until the word is spoken out loud in a room that has the authority to make it real. Calvin walked out without looking at me. I watched him go the way you watch weather move off in a direction that is no longer yours to follow. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright on the courthouse steps. Mr. Tatum offered to drive me home. I thanked him and declined. I wanted to walk. I needed to feel the ground under my own feet. I walked past the old cafe where James had proposed to me over burnt coffee and a piece of lemon meringue pie he hadn't ordered. Past the bus stop where Kenny used to wait every morning with his lunch bag swinging. Past the second-hand bookstore where Celestine once bought me a cookbook I never opened but kept on the shelf because she'd written something in the front cover. Everything looked the same. Everything felt different. At home I changed into my softest sweater, put the kettle on, and sat by the window with the late light coming in golden and slow. Nadia would be coming by soon. She always came on Fridays. I thought about what I wanted to say to her. Not the legal things, she already knew those. Something else. Something that had been taking shape in me for weeks, since before the will reading, since before Celestine died, since some quiet moment I couldn't quite name when I had finally stopped waiting for permission to be fully myself. I went to my desk and wrote it out. 3 pages, careful and clear. This is not a reward. This is recognition. You showed up. You stayed. You brought yourself, your time, your attention, and you asked for nothing in return. I want you to know that in a season when I sat in rooms full of people I had spent my life loving, you were the one who made me feel like I still mattered. Not because of what I had, but because of who I am. One day you may find yourself in a room where someone tells you that you don't belong there. I want you to remember this. You bring the folder. You sit in the chair. You stay. You owe no one your silence. Not for peace. Not for family. Not even for love. I sealed it and placed it on the mantel. Nadia arrived just before sunset, the way she always did, as reliable as the season changing. She had tea already planned and brought shortbread this time in a plain tin with a small yellow ribbon tied around it. We sat at the table. Talked about ordinary things. A new colleague at her library who stacked the returns in the wrong order. The neighbor's cat who had decided my porch was his personal resting place. Small things. Good things. Then I handed her the envelope. She looked at it, then at me. What's this? Words I wanted you to have, I said. She didn't open it right away. Just held it with both hands like it had some weight to it. Like she understood already, without reading a word, that it mattered. That was enough. We finished our tea. Watched the last of the light leave the yard. When she stood to go, she turned at the door and looked at me with that particular gaze of hers. You seem different, she said. I am, I said. Good different. Yes, I said. Good different. She hugged me before she left. Long and unhurried. The kind of hug that doesn't rush toward its own ending. And then I was alone. But alone the way a house feels when it's finally been put in order. Everything in its place. Every door that needed closing, closed. Every window that needed opening, open. I think often these days about what we leave behind. Not the property, not the accounts, not the furniture. The truth of how we lived. The choices we made when it cost us something to make them. There was a long season of my life when I believed that keeping the peace was the same as being good. That making myself agreeable was the same as being kind. That stepping back so others could step forward was the same as love. I don't believe that anymore. I believe in decency. But not the kind that requires you to disappear inside of it. I believe in family. But not the kind that only calls when there's something to collect. I believe in forgiveness. But I have learned that forgiveness and trust are not the same thing, and you can offer one without handing over the other. If any part of this story has sat with you, if you have ever stood in a doorway while someone told you that you didn't belong in the room you had every right to enter, I want you to hear this clearly. You can stop shrinking. You can say no. You can say enough. You can protect the parts of yourself you have spent years giving away to people who never once asked how much it cost you. And you don't have to apologize for arriving at that understanding later than you wish you had. You only have to decide that today is the day you stop waiting to be given permission. Your voice still matters. Your presence still matters. And if you needed someone to say that to you today, I hope this was enough. Leave a comment if it was. Share it with someone who needs to remember they are not alone. Because they are not. And neither are you.